Hello and welcome to the RationalFanz first ever Christmas Extravaganza. That is RationalFanz with a Z. Christmas Extravaganza has lots of food, fun, and sports. Except we don't really have the food and the fun. We just have sports. It's kind of fun. So Evan, first off, I know you would like to say something about Pete Rose and his ban from the sport of baseball as a whole.
All right, so as you know, Pete Rose, his case was reviewed by the commissioner of baseball, and his lifetime ban from baseball was upheld. The commissioner cited reasons for wanting to uphold the integrity of the game because apparently he thinks that gambling, it's bad for the integrity of the game. This message brought to you by FanDuel, the official sponsor of Major League Baseball. Like, come on, that doesn't make any sense. You're getting millions of dollars from FanDuel, and you're here complaining about some guy that bet on baseball in the mid-'80s. He's one of the best players of all time. Let him in the Hall of Fame. He didn't cheat to get his stats like some of these other people that were juicing on steroids. Yeah,
who's actually in the Hall of Fame now?
I don't know. I don't understand. I think that Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. He didn't cheat to get his stats. He deserved to be punished, but it's been 30 years. Maybe it's time to lighten up.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's all. But the fact that it was a lifetime ban, and kind of almost, I feel like Commissioner Rob Manfred is almost like afraid to take that suspension away because then you're kind of almost saying, well, we put a lifetime ban on him, but we repealed it. So, what's the point of discipline if you don't uphold the entire sentence? I'd like to see Pete Rose get into the Hall of Fame, like Evan said, one of the best players of all time. But I don't see that happening. But as a baseball player, I understand where Manfred's coming from. Protecting the integrity of the game, but there's so much more that goes on that they don't address as heavily, rather than a 30-year-old problem that could be resolved by now.
Yeah, baseball, has kind of used Pete Rose as their whipping boy. They're making an example out of him, and it's really a shame because he's one of the greatest players of all time, and for whatever reason, they're still gonna be, meanie poop heads when they're handling situations like these, and they're stubborn and they don't want to put him in the Hall of Fame. And it stinks because there's a lot of fans out there, including us, that do think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Like Rhett said, there's many other major things that other stars have done that the MLB just kind of shies away from and doesn't really say anything. Pete Rose bet on his own team. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you think your team's good enough, go put as much money as you want on them. And if they lose, that's your own fault. You lost your money and your team lost.
In a comparable situation in the NFL, Ray Lewis killed a couple people. Just saying.
Okay, well, he bet on his own team, but, that almost would cause suspicions did he bet on him? If he bet on him to lose, he could easily make that happen, by just saying, oh, do this. Well, you lose the game by doing this. But, I don't know. You got things like Barry Bonds, who set the home run record on steroids, but he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, and Pete Rose, he bet on games, but that's his own money, and it doesn't really affect the game of baseball as much. And, you've also got your cases like A-Rod, where he goes and gets suspended a whole season and a half or something for using steroids, and that's it. And, steroids are a bigger issue in the game right now than gambling was at that point. And I think the MLB should be looking to address, issues like steroids more than this Pete Rose problem. Just take his suspension away and let him go to the Hall of Fame.
Pete Rose never bet against his team. He always bet on his team. So there isn't a problem with that. Like I said, if you think your team's good enough, what's wrong with putting $500, $1,000 on them? And if they lose, you're out the money. No one else can say, oh, you lost the game for yourself, or the other team blew the game for you. A baseball game is still being played to the fullest integrity, and a little money is just being thrown around on the side just for your team.
A precedent was kind of set back in like the 1920s with the whole Black Sox
1919,
thing.
yeah.
1919.
I was actually just going to bring that up.
Because I think about 30-something people have been banned from baseball for life. The last one was Pete Rose. He was the last one before the Black Sox, I'm pretty sure. And, the situations there aren't nearly comparable. He didn't throw a World Series game. So,
well, the entire series was thrown by the White Sox.
Yeah.
So, in that situation, that was, those players were paid a little bit extra to throw the World Series. And, it all started when one White Sox player, he got sick and wasn't going to be able to play for the series. So the White Sox just said, well, maybe, we're probably not going to lose. He's one of their better players. And so, they just decided to throw it by getting paid a little bit of money, and those guys got banned for baseball. I understand that. That's a whole World Series, and back then it was 9 games. So that's a whole 9 games that you're going to throw. Well, 5 because, best of 9 or whatever. But still, the idea behind throwing a game is a lot worse than betting on your own team to win. It's not like you can make your team win. You can make your team lose, as demonstrated by the White Sox, but you can't make your team win, which is why I think Pete Rose should be allowed to be in the Hall of Fame.
Let's switch over to a little bit of a Heisman talk now. I don't know if anybody follows me on Twitter at @FantasyGod_. I tweeted out my Heisman top 3, and none of the 3 had Derrick Henry in there. In order, I had Christian McCaffrey, Keenan Reynolds, and Deshaun Watson. I don't know if any of you saw Keenan Reynolds this past weekend against Army, but Keenan Reynolds looks good. He set the FBS record for most touchdowns in a career, I believe, and I'm not really sure how he didn't get a trip invite to the Heisman, along with a couple of other notable snubs, but Keenan Reynolds was easily the biggest snub from the Heisman.
It's because he plays for Navy. Seriously, Navy, sure, they ended the season ranked 21st, I believe, but still, it's not really, when you play for Navy, they play in a smaller conference, so, well, they're not even in a conference, are they?
The American Conference,
Are they?
I think, yeah.
I thought they were one of the independents, but I think they're an independent.
They are? Oh, okay.
I feel like they're. But anyway, they finished this season 10-2. How come they're not getting more respect? But, Keenan Reynolds, he doesn't throw the ball a ton. He's only got 1,077 pass yards on the season, but his rushing, it's an astronomical number with that Navy offense. That Navy offense can pretty much run over anybody, and Keenan Reynolds for the Heisman, I could have seen it, but I'm more upset that McCaffrey didn't win it. All-purpose yards broke Barry Sanders' record, but Derrick Henry got it because he averages 50 carries a game for a team that can't throw the ball to save their life. I mean, by necessity, you're going to carry it 50 times if you're Derrick Henry. So, I would have liked to see McCaffrey win it, but, Henry had a good season, that's for sure. So, I can't complain.
Derrick Henry, he is a good player, and the reason that he won, the reason that his Heisman odds were 1-12 is because he plays for Alabama, and I think that's really the only reason. But a note on Christian McCaffrey, I think that all-purpose yards, just as a statistic, are just completely useless. Yeah, so what if you return punts and kicks? I don't really care. I mean, that's not a huge deal. What I really care about is offensive production. Yes, Christian McCaffrey was second in total rushing yards on the year, but that was to Derrick Henry. So I think that Derrick Henry played for a better team than Stanford, and so I think that's why he won. I do think that he deserved it. It was close. It was really close. I think Deshaun Watson, he deserves a lot of kudos too. He was a really great player. But I think that just with the way that Derrick Henry played going down the stretch, a lot of big games, especially against LSU, and that 276-yard game that he had late in the year, I think that's what put him over the top.
Alabama's offense isn't very creative at all. They just hand the ball off to Derrick Henry and just hope something happens. They're running the ball 30, 40 times a game with him. Does that hurt his NFL draft stock? As a workhorse back, they wear him out, and then he gets to the NFL, and then he can't really do much.
Well, yeah, as an NFL team, I wouldn't even touch. I wouldn't touch Derrick Henry with a 39.5-foot pole. But I think, another reason, too, why Christian McCaffrey didn't win the Heisman, outside of Johnny Manziel and Jameis Winston, they don't give the Heisman to, underclassmen. They always give it to the junior or the senior who has at least a decent season. And I really think that's another reason, too, why he didn't win it.
McCaffrey, I think he's more of an explosive back than Henry. Henry's the guy that's going to run you over. He looks like Eddie Lacy, quite honestly. Not quite that big. But, McCaffrey, if you look at his game log, he had 3 games where he ran for over 200 yards. And against UCLA, he ran for 243 yards on 25 carries. Now, I believe against Auburn, Derrick Henry ran the ball 40-some times and ran for over 200 yards.
276.
Right. So McCaffrey against UCLA in just about half of Henry's carries ran for almost as many yards. And like taking that game, those 2 games, and comparing them. So yeah, sure, Henry outran McCaffrey this season, but I think that McCaffrey, is more of an explosive back, and I don't know, I would have given him the Heisman. I can't change that, but that's just my opinion.
How mainstream media is to liberalism, so college football Heisman voting and top 25 voting is to Alabama. There's just a bias. And it's never going to go away, and that's the sad part. They love Alabama. I think that's why he won, is because he goes to Alabama. He's another crappy Alabama running back that's going to fail as a pro because he's either going to, A, get traded 3 times and be a complete bust, B, have one good season, go through the buffet line too many times and be a complete bust, or 3, I don't know, just get drafted and completely disappear. One of those 3 things, kind of maybe a Mark Ingram where you try to stay relevant and every week you're projected to get 15 fantasy points and you end up getting 6. Kind of one of those things.
Get drafted by the Browns or the Buccaneers and ruin his future?
Yeah.
That's the 3rd option.
Eddie Lacy, Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson. Looks like TJ Yeldon's starting to head down the bust path too. And then Derrick Henry, 5th Alabama running back in 6 or 7 years. That could be a big bust. Let's go to the NFL now. Carolina Panthers 13-0. They have a big game though this weekend against the Giants. Josh Norman is absolutely going to have his hands full covering Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham had a huge game Monday night against the Dolphins. That could be a very good matchup to watch on Sunday.
The other day I saw probably the most eye-popping stat that I've ever seen. Des Bryant has played 85 career games, and he has 15 100-yard games. Odell Beckham Jr. has played 25 games in his career, and he has 15 100-yard games. This kid is good. I mean, he's like first in yards, first in catches, and second in touchdowns over wide receivers' first 25 games. He's putting up like Randy Moss rookie season type numbers. I mean, he's so exciting to watch. Remember earlier in the year when everybody was calling him overrated because he had a couple games where he wasn't as good? Yeah, they're completely wrong. He is just tearing it up.
The thing that makes Odell Beckham so good is the fact that he can control his body so well. I don't know if any of you guys watched the Monday night game at all, but I'm sure you saw pictures of his catch again, like the one touchdown catch that he had. He's falling out of the end zone, and I don't know how he did it, but his knees are like almost on the ground, and yet he's got his 2 feet just in bounds. He's got the ability to contort his body and control his body like I've never seen before in a wide receiver. We saw that, with the stereotypical Odell Beckham catch where he reaches all the way back after, falling to the ground, somehow manages to catch the ball and come down in the end zone. He's got great body control and huge hands, and that's a great combination to make a good wide receiver.
Yeah, another thing, too, to note about Odell is, his combination of speed and quickness, too. He can run routes on a dime. And Eli Manning, he's just drooling over Odell Beckham. He's a wide receiver, or he's a quarterback's dream come true, But Odell Beckham, he's even shattering Randy Moss's records, he said, his first few years. And, it's incredible to see this kind of production from such a young wide receiver.
Mm-hmm. we kind of saw this a couple years back when the Giants won the Super Bowl over the Patriots for the second time. Victor Cruz, he was Eli's favorite target without a doubt. And, people were thinking that Victor Cruz would be the next big wide receiver. Well, he's been plagued by injuries. And honestly, if I'm Eli Manning, I'd be happier to have Odell than Victor Cruz because, Victor Cruz, yeah, he's really, really fast, but he's not as big as Odell. And he just doesn't have a knack for getting open like Odell. You see some wide receivers like Amari Cooper, that they're almost always open somehow, and they can always catch the ball. Perfect example is Megatron. You throw a ball within 4 feet of him, and he's going to come down with it somehow. And, Odell Beckham, I'm not going to compare him to Megatron yet because, Odell Beckham still is a little bit unproven in my opinion. But, I think he has the potential to be a little bit like Megatron.
24 touchdowns in 25 games. That's just ridiculous.
That's insane. That was supposed to be about the Panthers-Giants matchup this upcoming week.
We don't care. We still don't care. No matter how many, if they win the Super Bowl, we won't care.
All right. While we're on the Giants, we might as well talk about it. The two division races that the AFC South looked to be all right, but then it just kind of went down. And then you got the battle of two backup quarterbacks this week, TJ Yates and Matt Hasselbeck, most likely for the division crown. And then in the NFC East, you still got the three-team race, Giants, Eagles, Redskins, 6-7. All three are mediocre. And really, I don't think any of them deserve a playoff berth.
All right, so I'll take the AFC South because that's kind of my division, I guess. So, you got the Colts and the Texans at 6-7. They're playing next week to pretty much decide who's going to be the biggest loser. And it's almost shameful because this is probably, we've had sub 500 division winners before, but regardless of who wins the AFC South and NFC East, we're going to have maybe the two worst playoff teams of all time. I mean, the Giants can't stop blowing leads. I don't know how the Eagles are still in it. They still have one of the most dysfunctional teams of all time. The Redskins are the Redskins. The Texans have to start TJ Yates, and the Colts, just gave up 42 points and a half to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this is going to be a really sad wild card to watch the 4 seed get obliterated by the 5 seed. Probably the Jets or the Steelers.
Steelers will more than likely get the 5 seed, maybe the Chiefs. But if Andrew Luck comes back, do the Colts get any better and possibly go make a little run in the playoffs rather than just bowing out in the first round?
Well, I think a point to be made, the teams in the past, most recent past, have had, kind of stinky records. 7-8-1 Panthers ended up winning a playoff game. And then the 7-9 Seahawks, they ended up beating the Saints because, of course, the division winner gets a home game, which is crap. But if you have a losing record, but even the 9-7 Giants, they ended up winning the Super Bowl back in 2011. So I think that chip on their shoulder of teams with kind of not as good records, it ends up benefiting them in the playoffs. They have the mentality, we have nothing to lose, so they go out and just play their hearts out.
Yeah, I think Andrew Luck, I think he's a really good quarterback, and he can honestly do anything for the team. And I think that the Colts don't have much of a shot this season, really. But, anything could happen with Andrew Luck. 2 years ago against the Chiefs, when they were down by, I believe, 28, is that what it was? Yeah, and they came back to win. That's a sign of what Andrew Luck can do for a team. And, the Colts might be starting Charlie Whitehurst this week. That is the most frustrating news I've ever heard. But, if Andrew Luck comes back, all right, Mason, you can laugh, but you would be the first one to mention the Derek Anderson story last season with the Panthers, so I don't want to hear it. But, I don't know. I think Andrew Luck is going to help the Colts if he does return, and, anything can happen in the playoffs. It's football, and It's crazy sometimes.
You know, the Colts have a lot more problems than Andrew Luck can fix. Most of them have to do with every position on the field that Andrew Luck doesn't play. Everyone on their team is terrible. They've gone from a team with the best skill position players that everybody thought in the preseason to a team that has to start Charlie Whitehurst and is, throwing the ball 3 yards down the field every single play. It's just terrible to watch. And I didn't watch the meltdown. I couldn't take it anymore. I mean, 42-3 in the second half. Why? Chuck Pagano is gone. At least now we can get over the thought of keeping Chuck Pagano on our coaching staff because he's going to get run out of town no matter what happens. The dumbest thing that I saw this week was them putting Matt Hasselbeck, an already injured Matt Hasselbeck, back into a 37-16 ball game in the fourth quarter. That was the dumbest coaching move I've ever seen. That's like Jeff Fisher bad. You don't want to be Jeff Fisher bad.
Well, yeah, what was it? I heard yesterday on ESPN or something. I can't remember who was reporting. It was like Ed Werner or Adam Schefter or something. They mentioned that the top veteran quarterback for NFL teams right now to pick up who have quarterback injuries is Christian Ponder. So, the market is looking kind of bleak too. There's not a lot of options out there. But, the Colts, I do think they have the potential to be a good team. They got to get back on track this offseason. They got to start at the offensive and defensive line and just build their way up from there.
I showed this to you, I think, Evan, but the quote by Chuck Pagano, what was he even talking about?
I hope that they fire him and they eat him. Nobody wants Chuck Pagano on their coaching staff. Chip Kelly and Chuck Pagano, they both need to go into exile. They need to go to some island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea and think about what they've done for the next 10 years.
I kind of think that by saying that, Pagano is basically saying, well, I don't care. I know I'm getting fired. So basically it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of his life because, it's not like he's going to die because they fired him, I think is what he's saying. But, I think he's given up, quite honestly. But I'm honestly glad because Pagano, at first when I found out that the Colts had hired him, I had my doubts. But, he wasn't terrible for 2 years, and then this season happened, and now I don't want him around anymore. So, come on, Irsay, make a good owner move for once, and yeah,
stay sober for 3 hours. We're asking for 3 hours, Jim. 3 hours of sobriety. We will take your phone so you can't get on Twitter. You will go to your home phone. You will make some calls. And you will bring in Nick Saban to coach the Indianapolis Colts.
No. We're getting John Madden out of retirement. That's what we're doing.
Madden, yes.
Nick Saban is the coach of the Colts. I don't know if I could root for the Colts anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who they could bring in.
Urban Meyer,
that's definitely an option. When you bring in college coaches, there's always a chance that they're going to be a failure, which is what normally happens.
Chip Kelly.
Yep. So I don't even know who they would bring in. Who's even worth hiring these days?
Does the NFL landscape change if the Colts had decided to keep Bruce Arians and let Chuck Pagano go? And if Chuck Pagano went to the Cardinals or they just hired some completely different coach, how does the NFL landscape change?
The Colts, I think that they would be a better team because you see what Bruce Arians is doing with the Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
Just look back to what Bruce Arians did with the Colts. Andrew's rookie year. They dominated.
Yeah, they did.
When Chuck Pagano was sick. And, now what he's doing with the Cardinals, he's taken 53 role players. Carson Palmer, and he's turned them into probably the second or third best team in the NFL.
What's even more amazing is that he's got old guys. Chris Johnson's his running back, and yet he's getting the most out of him. He's got a very, very old football team, which brings experience, which is great to have. But he's got him as an NFC contender for the Super Bowl without a doubt. And I just think that the Cardinals, I think they're going to go far, but It's probably just because of Bruce Arians' hats. So you know,
I
we
want
should have
one
kept
of
him
those
around
hats.
for his hats.
You know, and if Chuck Pagano was on the Cardinals, I don't know how good they would be. I mean, it's hard to tell, but they certainly wouldn't be as good as they are with Bruce Arians. I think Bruce Arians is a great coach, and I'm sad that we let him go.
And Bruce Arians will win Coach of the Year. Sorry, Mason.
Let's play a little bit of an AFC. It's kind of a pick 'em, but not really.
Okay.
So 3 wild card teams in the AFC. Just about everybody else is virtually eliminated. Chiefs, Jets, and Steelers at all at 8-5. The Chiefs and the Jets hold the tiebreakers over the Steelers, so the Steelers would be out right now. But who sits out this year's playoffs and who gets in?
I would, in the AFC, I'd probably say that the Steelers sit out just because their roster has been decimated by injuries. Now, the loss of Le'Veon Bell hurt. Yeah, they do have D'Angelo Williams, but hey, you know, he could get hurt at any time too. The team I think that definitely gets in is the New York Jets. You know, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's been playing pretty well the last couple weeks, and you know, I think that the Jets could even make it, you know, to the divisional round, maybe AFC title game.
I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick he's had a good season this year, and I think it's because he's finally found a couple guys that he can throw the ball to. He's got Brandon Marshall now and Eric Decker, and you know, Eric Decker was mediocre in Denver, but now that Ryan Fitzpatrick likes Eric Decker so much, you know, he's become a very, very viable threat for any team, and now they have to count for Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. Decker's on my fantasy team, and he's been producing solid points every week, you know, in the 13s and 15 range about there. And, you know, I think, honestly, the Jets are a pretty scary team, and, you know, I think that they could make a run in the playoffs.
You know, the Jets have done more with less in the past. I mean, they made 2 AFC championship games with Mark Sanchez.
Yeah, Mark Sanchez. Think about that, everybody.
I said that right, Mark Sanchez. So I think the Jets definitely make it into the playoffs. Chiefs, Steelers, you know, you can either get the Chiefs, who are, well, they're the Chiefs, one of the most bland teams in the NFL. I didn't even know they were 8-8. I mean, they started 1-5. They were terrible. They won 7 in a row. And they just keep winning. Their defense isn't half bad. And so I think I'd pick the Chiefs over the Steelers because, you know, if the Steelers can't throw the ball down the field, it's hard for them to win. The only reason that they beat the Bengals is because A.J. McCarron was a terrible quarterback, and he threw 2 picks. I mean, D'Angelo Williams, he rushed 23 times for 72 yards. He was their leading rusher against the Bengals. So it's not like he was having a great game. And so, yeah, I think that it's definitely going to be Jets-Chiefs.
You know, it's interesting. My 2 picks would have been Chiefs-Steelers. Honestly, I don't see any way that the Jets make it. I think the Steelers are just too good to be sitting out of the playoffs. If they get into a wild card team like against the Colts or whoever the 3 seed would be, Broncos, Bengals, Patriots, you know, I think they're just too good to not make the playoffs, and they could even potentially make a Super Bowl run as a 5 or 6 seed.
No. No. They have Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. They have a deep passing game, and that's it. Their defense is atrocious. You can't forget how bad that defense is. They got torched by the Seahawks. They've been getting torched all year. Did you watch Week 1 against the Patriots? They forgot to cover Rob Gronkowski.
You can't do that.
Not a good defense at all. And you think they're going to make the Super Bowl? Yeah, right.
Yeah, their offense is definitely not something that you want to deal with, but if you play the Steelers, you got to like your chances if you're the team that's on offense. And I would disagree with Mason. Then I'm thinking that Pittsburgh is going to have a pretty dismal playoff run if they get in at all.
Stay rational, Mason Gray.
Let's not forget, though, the Steelers beat the 10-2 Arizona Cardinals with the third string quarterback. I completely forget his name now. Landry Jones. They beat the Cardinals with Landry Jones. Ben Roethlisberger is 300 times better than Landry Jones. If they can beat the Cardinals, they can beat just about anybody.
Landry Jones said, "Here, Antonio Brown, have the ball." 5 yards down the field, and Antonio Brown took off and scored for them. That's why Landry Jones got the win for them. And it's not anything that the Steelers have done special. It's the fact that they have Antonio Brown, who's easily in the top 3 of the best wide receivers in the game right now. Steelers will not make the playoffs. And if they do, by some random chance, they will get knocked out in the first round. Mark my words.
Okay, well, let's stop arguing about this because we all know deep down inside that the Bills are going to make a playoff run. And so let's let's talk about let's do almost a pick-em too for the NFC East.
Ooh.
So we have the Eagles, Giants, and Redskins all up there, tied for the division. If I were to pick a team right now, I would actually go with the Washington Redskins. And here's why. Kirk Cousins, he can actually get the job done on offense. He's not spectacular, but he's not bad. He's an above average game manager, and he knows how. And if when he gets the ball into whether it be Deshaun Jackson's hands or Jordan Reed's hands, Mason's fantasy tight end, their offense can put up some points, and their defense is, average enough to the point where they can win the stinky NFC East.
Cousins has been quietly good this season. 3,306 yards and 18 touchdowns, and he's got the Redskins to 6-7. It's been such a far fall from RG3. Everybody thought that RG3 would be the next big thing for the Redskins, but it all started when he got hurt against the Seahawks in that playoff game, and he's just gone downhill, and all of a sudden, he's not even getting thought of to be the starting quarterback, and it's Kirk Cousins now, who was quietly good at Michigan State, and he's getting his chance now in the NFL, and he's proving himself that he can win games for his team and possibly get him to the playoffs.
I think that right away we should discount the Eagles because every time they win, it's a complete fluke. I mean, when they beat the Patriots, they scored 3 non-offensive touchdowns, and that was just ridiculous. So let's take the Eagles out of the discussion. I think that the most consistent team, the team with the most talent, is definitely the Giants.
Yeah, I would agree.
Take off 2 minutes a game, and they're 11-2. They have the ability to make a playoff run every time that they are like a 9-7, 10-6. Well, they're not going to be 10-6, but a 9-7 team in the playoffs. They always seem to do great, and I think that you should never count the Giants out because Eli Manning, he's not the most consistent quarterback, but in a heartbeat, he can become one of the best playoff quarterbacks the NFL has ever seen. And so I think that the Giants will get in. If the Redskins do win, I think they will lose in the wild card. But if the Giants, if they win the division, I think they have a better chance to do a lot more than just make the wild card.
Okay, well, think about this. So Cam Newton has thrown 3,062 yards this season, 28 touchdowns. Eli Manning has thrown 3,655 yards. That is 600 more yards than Cam Newton and 28 touchdowns, same amount of touchdowns. And yet Eli is as far from the MVP conversation as you can get because his team is 6-7. That's the difference. Cam Newton, sure, he's a talented quarterback, but Eli Manning has found a way to keep the Giants afloat. And I almost think it's really a fluke that the Giants are 6-7, quite honestly, because they have so much talent on that team and a quarterback who is, actually one of the better playoff quarterbacks in the league. And I don't know what's wrong with the Giants. I don't know why they're 6-7, but it's either going to be the Redskins or Giants. That's for sure.
On the Redskins, they played their last 2 games at home on the road. They are 5-2 at home this season and 1-5 on the road, with their only road win coming this past week against the Chicago Bears. So I'm not really sure you can count that as a road win, but they played their final 2 games at home, I don't really think they play their final 2 games away from home. Excuse me. I don't think they can get two of those games done away from home.
The Giants, they have a tough schedule. They have to play the Panthers, and they play the Cardinals. No, they play the Vikings. That's right. And so they have a tough schedule. But, I think that if anybody's going to beat the Panthers coming up, it's going to be the Giants. The better the team, the better the Giants play. It always has been, no matter what year. I mean, they had been playing terrible this year, and when they played the Patriots, they almost won that game.
Take 2 minutes off, and they...
Yep. So, I think that, the Giants have the best chance to beat the Panthers. If they can get a win against the Panthers, then I think that they'll be in the driver's seat to take the division.
Well, easily, because they play Minnesota and then Philadelphia. So that last game against Philadelphia, it always seems like the last game to be played in the NFC East always decides who's going to win it. Like, we've seen it before between, it'll be a Sunday night game between the Giants and the Cowboys, and Dan Bailey misses a field goal, and the Giants win the NFC East. But, I'd agree with Evan. Panthers, Giants, that's, I guess we can kind of look to matchups of this week, I guess. But, I'm going to say that's going to be a good game, and I think the Giants are going to be able to knock off the Panthers, make them 13-1. And, the Giants always find a way to play well against good teams, like Evan said. We saw it when the Patriots were making that undefeated run, and they played the Giants in the regular season. Giants almost knocked them off, and then they did in the Super Bowl. So, the Giants always find a way to play well against good teams, and this week will be no exception. 13-1 Panthers.
I haven't even made my prediction. I'm going with the Philadelphia Eagles. Save Nate's Super Bowl prediction that he made in the preseason. What was your prediction?
It was like Patriots, Eagles, or something. I didn't really have time to think about it, though. I just made it up on the fly, but whatever.
On the fly.
But on elbow, it's table. Okay.
I think the Eagles can win a couple games in the NFC East. Their final 2 games, one is against the Redskins and the other is against the Giants. But they do play the Cardinals this Sunday. The rest of the NFC East has some tough games this week too, so it's not like any other NFC East team play some cupcakes. So I kind of expect all 3 of the 6 and 7 NFC East teams to lose, drop to 6 and 8. Eagles pick up 2 big wins at the end, go 8 and 8, make the playoffs.
All right. So next week, I think that the key game of the week is going to be Steelers-Broncos. That's going to be one interesting game because, the Broncos had been playing well with Brock Osweiler until last week when he couldn't, get a touchdown in the red zone. And, the Steelers, we don't know what kind of performance we're going to see from them because they didn't play the greatest against the Bengals. It's just they played A.J. McCarron. So that's going to be a really interesting matchup. The Broncos are looking to, get a first-round bye in the playoffs, and the Steelers, they just want to make the playoffs. So that's going to be an interesting game to watch.
2 big games this week. Colts, Texans, and Steelers, Broncos. It's probably Charlie Whitehurst versus TJ Yates. And then Brock Osweiler versus AJ McCarron. Those games sound absolutely boring. And I probably won't watch either one of them. Steelers. I thought it was
Ben Roethlisberger plays for the Steelers.
Yeah.
AJ McCarron. Then they play a backup quarterback. I don't know who they play. I haven't looked at I don't know.
Okay, my game of the week.
My
game of the week would have to be Packers Raiders. The Packers, they really haven't been that good this year. And the Raiders are kind of underrated, Derek Carr has thrown for like 3,300 yards and 28 touchdowns this season. He's
better numbers than Cam Newton, and he's far from the MVP conversation.
Well, these quarterbacks do have better passing numbers. You got to mention, though, that Cam Newton does have pretty awesome rushing stats. So
true.
You got to take that into account. But, these other quarterbacks do have better passing numbers. And, I think the Raiders do have the potential to beat the Packers this weekend. And hopefully for my Vikings, they do. So, yeah.
So the Colts-Texans game is probably the game this week that holds the most implication because one of those teams is going to win the division. And surprisingly, Jacksonville is not far out of that because Jacksonville is actually a better team than I think we think they are. You know, they showed that with the thrashing of the Colts. And Blake Bortles, he's a pretty solid quarterback. And, you know, he should be able to do something with this team, maybe get a wild card next season. But, you know, if Jacksonville wants anything this week, they want a tie between the Colts and the Texans because that'll help them a lot. But, you know, basically the winner of that game is pretty much going to take the AFC South. So TJ Yates versus possibly Charlie Whitehurst for the NFC or AFC South Championship. That is a terrible matchup. Nobody thought it would come to that, but I mean that's what it is. And
I mean, if anything, it was going to be Andrew Luck versus T.J. Yates, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Couple notes on the AFC South race: Jaguars this week play the 6-7 Falcons, and are 3-point favorites over the Falcons. You know, I don't see any reason the Jaguars can't get it done against the Falcons. Falcons have just gone straight into free fall mode. They'll probably finish 6-10 on the season, but they could get a win, push them up to 6-7, be tied with the loser of this week's game, and they 6-8. Yeah, that
6-8.
Yeah, that'd be the loser of this game, of this Colts-Texans game. Oh well, but they could make a run. They hold virtually none of the tiebreakers against the Colts and Texans because their division record is so bad. So they're going to need to beat the Colts or Texans by record rather than hoping for a tiebreaker and they get the tiebreaker.
Because, mind you, the Colts are still 3-1 in their division, and they are yet to play the hapless Titans. And,
a second time, yeah.
Yeah, a second time.
Well,
and so that's going to be, I mean, maybe they'll get destroyed, but maybe, just maybe they can win. And maybe Andrew Luck will be back.
Hopefully.
We don't know. We can only hope. We can only pray. Santa?
Santa for Christmas? We want
Santa,
Andrew
please.
Luck back. Well, you know, the Colts play the Texans this week and the dumpster fire Dolphins next week and then the hapless Titans the week after that. So in theory, they should be able to win the AFC South at 9-7 and get to the playoffs and get demolished in the first round. So that's probably what will happen.
If the Colts get this 4 seed, they'd probably go up against the Chiefs or Steelers or something or whatever. But if they win, they'd probably get a divisional round matchup with the New England Patriots.
Yeah, watch another 45-8 Colts-Patriots playoff game. And, of course, Colts wouldn't win. And so, you know, half of me wants a better draft pick. Half of me wants to make the playoff for pride reasons. But, you know, listen to me talking like I'm on the team. But anyways, you know, I think that if the Colts, you know, anything's possible, but I don't see the Colts going very far in the playoffs.
Another reason I see a Steelers Super Bowl run, Steelers get the 5 seed, they face the Colts in the first round. We already saw what happened with the Colts Steelers already this season. So, you think it changes again? I don't think so. I think if that happens, Steelers just roll over the Colts again.
Okay, we'll see.
All right, guys. So, you know, this is our Christmas extravaganza, and it's almost Christmas time. We're getting excited, you know, for the presents. And, you know, we're getting excited for the presents. The snow, probably not. You know, the magic of the season is in the air. But we know what we're all looking forward to most, and that's the food, all the Christmas food. And so I thought, you know, it's our Christmas extravaganza. Why not do a Christmas dinner fantasy football draft?
Yes.
All right. So what I want you guys to do is, you know, Mason, I'll give you the first pick. Tell me which Christmas dish you would select first overall with your Christmas fantasy football draft pick.
I got to go classic. No way I can go against macaroni and cheese, home baked. That's easily the best Christmas dish out there.
That's a strong pick. It's hard to go wrong with all that cheesy goodness. It's a big hit at the kids' table, too. So I like that one. Rhett, who would you take number one overall?
I'm going to go with my grandma's cheesy mashed potatoes. They are the best food that I've ever had at any holiday. And the cheesy melted goodness trumps anything. If you pair it with a slab of ham, can't be undefeated in fantasy food.
I think that you have all of the strength of Mason's pick, but the fact that it's also mashed potatoes, it's a big hit with the old folks too. So you got the kids table locked down, and you got the big people table locked down. Whatever goes on there, I still don't know because I'm never there. But whatever happens there, you got it locked down. Nate, who would you take?
I'm kind of going with the sleeper pick here. I'm going with, maybe a nice basket of warm, crispy rolls. It doesn't matter what the roll is. Just slap some butter on there, maybe a little honey.
Oh, yeah.
Man, that's good stuff.
You could put down about 6 of those in one sitting.
We always, early on, I have my sister and our 2 cousins. It's just us at the kids' table. Early on, we would have to make a lot of trips back into my grandma's kitchen for the rolls. So we decided, you know what, Grandma, you're going to make us a basket of rolls for ourselves. And I think we might have lost that privilege because last year we had a candle at our table, and my cousin Colin decided it'd be a good idea to start, trying to get his bread a little toasty, and it ended up dropping it into the candle. And so, yeah, that's a strong pick. Everybody loves the crescent rolls.
Your turn, Evan.
Who would I pick? I'm a kid at heart, and I love desserts. And at Christmas time, there is no better dessert than my grandma's butterscotch pie. She always makes one for everybody else and one butterscotch pie for Evan. And it may not be a hit with everybody else. I may not have a winning record, but at least I'll have butterscotch pie. So if anything,
that's awesome.
That's what I would pick. All right.
I think this might be the only podcast on the internet where you can find people talking about dropping rolls and candles and butterscotch pie.
So we've gone with who you would pick first. Who's your Mr. Irrelevant? What's the last dish on earth that you would pick for Christmas dinner?
All right, I'm going to go with this might sound weird to you guys, but I'm going to go with sweet potatoes. I am not a sweet potato guy at all. I would rather eat beets than sweet potatoes. People don't think I'm crazy, but at Christmas time, my grandma will make it's like sweet potatoes and then marshmallows and like brown sugar. And
every grandma do that?
Yes, every grandma does. And I just scoop off the marshmallows and brown sugar and don't eat the sweet potatoes because I hate sweet potatoes. That is my Mr. Irrelevant.
My grandma, she's got her yellow sweet potato skillet thing, and every year it's, Evan, you gonna get some sweet potatoes? No, Grandma. What, you don't like sweet potatoes? No, Grandma.
I didn't like them last year, and I don't like them this year.
All right, Mason.
My Mr. Irrelevant would probably have to be green bean casserole.
Took mine.
I absolutely hate that stuff.
I love green bean casserole. I would have put that as a close second to mashed potatoes.
Oh my God, controversy. Nate, who you got?
Well, around Christmas time, everyone makes cookies for Santa. But then there's always that person who makes raisin cookies. Come on. Really? No one likes raisin cookies. They're gross, and when you think they're chocolate chip cookies and you eat them, oh, come on.
I think that raisin cookies were invented at the first Thanksgiving as a joke to play on the Indians. Like, oh, here's a chocolate chip cookie. Oh, that's not chocolate chips. It was either that or it was like an extreme accident. Like somehow a box of raisins got knocked into a batch of dough and they were like, ooh, this might be good. But it wasn't, but they told people it was. I don't know why we still have it.
Okay, so my least favorite, my absolute least favorite is the green bean casserole. It's got like that weird onion stuff in it, but you already took mine. And so, do you guys know what Pink Lady is? It's like, all right, so it's got whipped cream, marshmallows, coconut.
Ooh.
It's so nasty. Like, you think,
I know what
it's
you're
all
talking
right
about
if
now.
you maybe without coconut's disgusting. But you think, all right, maybe it'd be all right with just the whipped cream and marshmallows. But the texture is just so nasty.
Yeah, it's
It's
yeah,
disgusting.
It is. Yeah. I know what you're talking about now. I've never heard it called that. All right, real quick, guys. Favorite Christmas movie?
Ooh. I think I have to go Elf. That's a classic. Will Ferrell is an absolute comedy genius. Anything with Will Ferrell is going to be funny.
What about you, Evan?
All right, so, I got to go with the Christmas Story. We watch it every year on Christmas Eve. They got that all-day Christmas marathon.
Yeah, they do.
It's got just so much sentimental value for me, and it's just great.
Nate?
I'm going with a more recent classic, The Polar Express.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I would have named any of those three, but you all took them, so I'm going to have to agree with one of you guys. I'm going Polar Express. It's a nice, classic, heartwarming film, and it, just really, really touches the kid in all of us.
I think you got to mention, though, the conductor looks very creepily like Brad Childress. That kind of, with the mustache going on, he's kind of bald. That disturbs me. But, we got to mention, too, with that movie, the graphics are going to look pretty creepy in 30 years.
That's true.
I love that movie now, but when I was a kid, I was freaked out by it, especially that scene when they're coming back from the engine and, there's going through that room with all the broken toys.
And then
the ghost dude using the
yeah.
marionette.
Yep.
Oh, that freaked me out. Like, I don't want to be in that room. I don't want toys for Christmas, and so it kind of ruined my life.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, and we will not be here for the next 2 weeks. We'll be back here in 3 weeks. Thanks, Christmas break. As always, that is the end of our show. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.